So on that wonderful note, let's begin the Realty Plus e-conclave with the first session of the day on the topic warehousing sector redefined by e-commerce and 3PL. Let me introduce our panel members. The session will be chaired by Shyam Arumugam, Managing Director, Industrial and Logistics Services, Colliers, India. Shyam has experience in real estate of more than 16 years and is widely respected as one of the key Indian leaders in the industrial and logistics real estate space. He has worked with the well-known corporates in India and abroad, and along with his team of industrial experts, has accelerated the success of all the clients. Let me now welcome our eminent speakers in an alphabetical order. I introduce Aditya Sikri, President, Indospace. And as we all know, Indospace is India's largest investor, developer, and manager of Grade A industrial and logistics real estate. Aditya has over 29 years of work experience, of which more than 21 years has been in the real estate sector, both in the domestic and international markets. Our next eminent panel member, I introduce Mr. N. Shridhar, CEO, Greenbase Industrial and Logistics Park. With more than 3 decades of extensive experience in the corporate landscape, Mr. Shridhar is aptly accredited as the architect of Greenbase Industrial and Logistics Parks, a new age business of Hiranandani Group. His portfolio diversifies across land acquisition, fundraising, wealth management, valuation, mergers, and acquisitions. Our next panel member is Mr. Rahul Pandit, CEO, Horizon Industrial Parks. Rahul Pandit has 30 years of experience in building and transforming businesses. He was earlier the founding MD and CEO of Hampstead Living, a Warburg Pincus JV for rental housing, and has also served as the MD and CEO of Tata Group's Ginger Hotels. He was part of the Tata Leadership Group and was the founding team member, President and Executive Director of Lemon Tree Hotels. He's a member of the CI National Committee on Tourism and a member of the Rental Housing Association of India. Our next panel member, let me introduce Rajat Garg, Director Investments, ESR India. Real estate private equity investment specialist, Rajat Garg has 16 years of experience with world's leading fund managers in India, US, and South Asia across asset classes. Currently, his focus is on industrial logistics and data center spaces, and has raised and deployed more than $500 million across greenfield land acquisitions, core assets, and joint ventures with end-to-end execution, including negotiations, structuring, and exit. Our next and final member of this panel, let me introduce Richard Theknath, Chairman and Managing Director, JetFreight Logistics. During 24 years of his career with JetFreight, Richard Francis Theknath has been working closely with the JetFreight team and has created a committed and skilled set of employees for his organization. Under his directorship, JetFreight has been recognized as the #1 agent for 10 consecutive years by various airlines like Air India, Cathay Pacific, Saudi Airlines, Gulf Air, Emirates, etc. So this is our eminent panel. And now let me hand it over to our moderator to take over the proceedings.
Thank you, Sapna. Thank you so much. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you, Realty Plus. I'm very happy to see all of them known faces, industry leaders who are joining me on this panel. Some of them would be thinking that we met only yesterday, and again we have to see Shyam now. So thank you so much. Thank you for joining in. A very interesting topic, very close to all the panelists' heart. Just wanted to check, Sapna. I'm not getting on screen. Rajat, is Rajat joining in?
He is joining in a few minutes. He's having some technical problems.
No problem.
Yeah.
So we start then in the interest of
Yes.
time. Thank you for all the audience who are joining in. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from whichever part of the world that you're joining us. I think I was in a lot of panel conferences where everybody was asking, how's the Josh? And we all need to say very high. I think in today's world, I think in this particular sector, I need to see how's the heat. I think it's been a very hot market for some time now. Over the last couple of years, I think while the pandemic has kind of kept a lot of people indoors, I think for all of us on the screen, I think we have not rested a single minute. I think be it Aditya, Shridhar, or Rahul, who's joined us in the bandwagon now. I think we've been all busy. So it's been a very positive sector. and a lot of work happening in this sector. So over the next 1 hour, we try to keep audience engaged and try to kind of give them a very, very good perspective on how this entire sector has undergone kind of metamorphosis, as they call it. We're seeing so much of shifts, so much of trends that are emerging, and no better than the people on screen who can give you a ringside view as to what's happening. Also, we'll do some crystal ball gazing as to where we are heading to as well. And hopefully, I welcome all of you to stay engaged for the next 1 hour. I know it's a post lunch session, but we try to keep you awake. So, Aditya, we'll start with you. I mean, I know because your name starts with A, so you have to be the default opening batsman for all our webinars. So, very happy to be asking you, like, this sector. You've seen e-commerce grow from strength to strength. I think ever since e-com started and compliance became a key, I think a lot of people who kind of have this, and I think clients come and ask us questions like, what is a grade A product and things like that, and then we point to a direction in Oragadam. So, want to ask you, I mean, how large is this e-commerce opportunity, and how has e-commerce transformed first? Forget defining the sector, but how has e-commerce transformed now in India? I mean, that would be my first question.
Sure. Thanks, Shyam, and thank you for having me on the panel, and hello to all my friends. It's a long answer, but I'll try and keep it as brief as possible, Shyam. The thing is that, you know, e-commerce has transformed hand in glove with the warehousing or industrial logistics sector in India. Whether it is you know, what Shridhar has created, or what Indospace has done, or what Rahul is doing, and others, Rajat, etc., is, you know, we have consistently tried to deliver a grade A product in the market in terms of providing a real estate solution. And e-commerce has actually played a significant role in that, and our business has played a significant role in the growth of e-commerce. At the end of the day, for any e-commerce company, having a large or a mothership in terms of fulfillment centers is their bread and butter, right? And that needs to be completely sacrosanct in terms of their infrastructure requirements. That has changed course over the years. I think there has been a clear differentiator between grade B and grade A assets in what we do as a collective group. Just to give you some numbers, and coming to your main question, the size of the opportunity is there and inherent in the statistics that there are in front of you. I'll rattle off a few numbers to you very, very quickly, and that kind of is the answer in itself. By 2024, 900 million people in India are going to be making online purchases, right? And smartphone penetration from 2019 to 2024 is going to go up from 23% to 60%, right? 100% of PIN codes, I think we're already at 99% or 98% or something, zip codes have been tapped as delivery destinations by the e-commerce players. And if you add to all of this, what we are seeing in terms of action for tier 2 cities, where I think all of us in our own different strategies are going and trying to buy land and deliver these solutions, goes to show what the e-commerce opportunity is on a standalone basis. I think in the next 7 or 8 years, e-commerce is going to be a total of, I think, 25% of the total organized retail market in India, which was at one time, not so long ago, less than 2% or 1%. So right. That shows the latent potential. Yes, pandemic has helped in accelerating this potential, but that doesn't mean that the pandemic has created this potential. It was already there. It is just provided as a trigger because it led to change in shopping patterns and shopping habits and consumption movements. But this is the entire underlying potential of e-commerce. And I think that irrespective of where e-commerce stands as a real estate percentage in our collective or individual portfolios, it is only a matter of time that that number is going to grow significantly.
Thank you, Aditya. I think you have touched upon the crux and kind of set the tone for the next few conversations. Uh, I think e-commerce by itself comes up not only with scale, but also they come up with a lot of customizations and kind of their needs have changed over the years, right? Just for the uninitiated, I mean, what was it in when you started with e-commerce journey on the fulfillment center? We had large things. To what is it today? Is it the same or is it kind of seen a paradigm shift in terms of what you're building for them?
Are you asking me?
Yeah.
No, it's shifted. You see, the thing is that India plays catch up with the Western world. So whether it's Amazon or Flipkart or anyone else, whatever they have implemented as their initiatives in China and in the US and in the Western hemisphere at large, slowly they try and implement here. Now, as a developer, do we like that or do we not like that? Yeah, we love the size of the real estate, but the scope and the scale is very, very different. So with each passing year, in the interest of modernization, I think the real estate solution that we are continuing to provide becomes more and more, what's the word, diplomatically put, non-standard. And so I think that is one of the things that has shifted consistently from an infrastructure standpoint. From a business and from a strategy standpoint, I should have probably said this first. Ever since GST happened in India, the entire Indian market has become a single unified market. So people have had this ability to draw straight lines from JNPT to wherever they want to deliver to household. And in that straight line, they can have fulfillment centers, they can have sort centers, they can have distribution centers, they can have in-city, last mile delivery centers without having any regulatory framework as any kind of impediment to their growth strategy. So I think these two things have led to consistent changes. I suspect that we're going to continue to see changes in their requirements, especially when it comes to location. There are, without taking names because it's not fair for me to take names of operators, but there are some operators who are shifting and getting closer to the seller base in terms of their fulfillment center strategy rather than the big city strategy. And some are doing just vanilla boxes and some are doing like a hybrid of the two. So I think it's ever evolving, and all of this is with the underlying objective from these e-commerce companies to gain greater efficiencies in whatever they do.
Thank you, Aditya. Thank you. That was brilliant. I think two perspectives that emerge. E-commerce is still evolving. I mean, it's not the end of it. I mean, it is going to continue to evolve as well. And thanks to partners like you all, I think you are also walking along with them to kind of see how the shifts are changing and trying to absorb it. I like the term non-standard because yes, it is kind of a lot of customization and non-standard items that come in. The spec sheets of various giants have increased from what I started working at 56 pointer to 176 and growing. So that goes to show that there's a lot more to bring into the picture. Thank you, Aditya. Thank you for the opening note, and thank you so much for splitting that. So Shridhar sir, my question is next to you. I mean, from somebody who's worked in these industries, especially I go back to your Coke days, where you kind of created such massive infrastructure. When I started my career, like anybody else, the rookie gets a thing that real estate is location. Maybe my industry peers have now started saying it's people, but the location still takes the upper hand. So, so from your standpoint, how critical is location to e-commerce? I mean, especially from today's standpoint, where like Aditya said earlier, it used to be a fulfillment center vis-a-vis sort center, then a last mile delivery. Have things changed? Are there anything to watch out for? Because you are aligning a lot of supply. So the question is to you, sir.
Yeah, thank you, first of all, Shyam and Realty Plus, Sapna and team. And good to see my dear friends all over in the panel. And yes, it's an interesting conversation. I think we are at the cusp of, like when the establishment said make in India and logistics, industrial and warehousing playing a large role. I mean, talking about a $3 trillion economy, out of which you're talking about more than $500 billion of it coming from here. the crucial aspect for this entire industry is that, typically I'd like to start with an opening remark of saying that we are all in an accelerated mode to bring down the gap. I mean, typically if you compare logistics cost across globe, we're talking about 13% of GDP in India vis-a-vis 8% GDP across US or Europe. And now there are various reasons for it. Let's not compare. These are not apples to apple, because India is a very different country, a country within country. Having said that, and having gone through the remarks what Aditya has put up and others, so I think I'll take your question in terms of location. Yes, in supply chain, let me share a very small example of something which you reminded me of my past. And in it was all about setting up 54 locations across the country for the Coca-Cola company and establishing factories, and with a concept of either nearness to market or nearness to raw material, given the entire fact of supply chain. Similarly, in Britannia, I worked to ensure that we get the lower LCM, the lowest cost to market. Again, it was a reference to bringing together either it's like milk bikkies. The market was south, but then not that the biscuit had a lot of milk in it, but unfortunately people believe like that. Or moving a tiger biscuit from Chhattisgarh to Bombay, you actually don't even recover the price, because your entire logistics cost, which is the point of discussion today, was much higher than the GST benefit or the tax benefit that you got by putting the plant in Chhattisgarh. So why I'm highlighting this is to pinpoint the fact that location is a very important aspect and is a key crucial thing. And yes, it has changed in terms of the supply chain disruption that you have seen, the digital transformation that you have seen, but location continues to be a very critical factor for this, especially the e-commerce, e-fulfillment, as well as the manufacturing bases, which I gave you an example of LCM, and as well as for the 3PLs. Now, what I see the current trend is people are moving away, even in Asian Paints, when I had put in the right from an SKU to a plant, the entire supply chain model of tracking, location and warehousing became a very key. But those days, people were using the 3PLs were using mesh networks. Like you could outsource a distribution center, you could outsource a small warehousing place. Now, compared to that, today you are now working with a hub and spoke model, and even the hub and spoke is also now facing a disruption in terms of realignment with respect to customer bases, consumption centers, vis-a-vis supply chain and raw material and the manufacturing location center. So it is to the choice of the customer. If it is a customer like an H&M, Unilever, Asian Paints, Coca-Cola, it will be the LCM, lowest cost to market. It could be through a series of supply chain events, or if it is a e-commerce in the 3PL, it is more in terms of being close to consumption centers. Like, the recent example is 3PLs are also doing pin code wise dark stores, which are much smaller in size as compared to a large warehouse, and which also goes in line with your in-city warehousing model. But more importantly, all of these are location specific. So location becomes very critical as 3PLs and e-commerce, which is 60% of your warehousing market. Keep industrial and manufacturing out of it, which we are also large in terms of our data, in terms of our profile. But warehousing specifically, given the competitiveness in the marketplace today and the supply and the inflation factors, it becomes that much more imperative for you to choose location. So what will play a critical role for location is the proximity. The warehouses normally should be, apart from the need of the hour for 3PL and this, it's also about, proximity to a transportation hub where you can get a lot of transportation and transportation services that will come, which will streamline the whole process, reduce cost and the time frame. You don't want your product sitting in the warehouse for a long period of time. You're talking about an algorithm which will ensure that the inventory moves fast. Now, there is a desired consumer base, especially hub and spoke. Now, a lot of tier 2 cities are becoming consumer bases, and you make them the hub, and then you start supplying to the consumer bases. For example, targeting densely populated as well as region with high increased percentage of income when choosing a warehouse is a priority for a e-commerce demand. That's what a Flipkart or an Amazon would like to do, or a First Source. All of these guys would do. And because I've been in real life dealing with these guys and sitting through their process of understanding why they want this at that particular location.
Right.
Then workforce availability and stability is also an important factor from a location perspective. I mean, why would you choose a Bhiwandi vis-a-vis a Panvel, or why would you choose a Farooq Nagar or Noida or a Bilaspur side in Gurgaon? It all depends on how well the infrastructure and the workforce ability. So market and environmental factors is again the way. I think that's been while Dr. Niranjan did mention about the infrastructure and road availability, I think which is all across the country, that also becomes a very critical factor for the location. So, as 3PL and e-commerce, which are the 60% of the warehousing demand today, as you see, and balance coming directly from the D2C customers, location becomes more specific and more customized to the supply chain solution that each one has implemented. And that's why location becomes a very critical element. And I see it evolving and more evolving, because as you will see when I speak further, that tier 2 cities are becoming also increasing the locations for putting up your to serve the consumer market, because the touch and feel market has now moved to a click and buy market. Because I can see, for example, person like me used to buy 100% say touch and feel. Maybe in the last 4 or 5 years or 3-4 years, I moved to a close to 40-50% from a click and buy market. Okay. So that's the digital transformation that's also emphasized when you choose a location, because then you have to be more closer to that specific consumption base.
Thank you so much, sir. That was a very well-rounded answer and a very detailed one. I think a lot of audience will take back something from there, because location plays a very vital part in any real estate decision. And second thing, you also elaborate on why that location, where you give rattle out a lot of points as to what needs to be looked at, apart from the pricing part. Pricing part is very interesting. I have a separate size of the discussion.
Separately.
Yeah, so we'll tackle it separately. Rajat, I see your hand up, so I come to you, Rajat. I mean, do you want to add on to some views of Shridhar?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I just had a very recent market incident that I think we're all learning. So I thought I'll add to what Mr. Shridhar said. In Bangalore, traditional retail, traditional density of population is all in the center of the city. Areas around Yashwantpur, UB City, which is traditionally known as dense residential, more high-income neighborhoods. But you'd be very surprised that when we go to an e-commerce guy or an organized retail player and ask for their, let's say, preferences for in-city warehousing, which is one of the new segments we're exploring. Very interestingly, they told me, no, it's not central Bangalore. They want to be in Whitefield, Sarjapur, Kormangla, because it's both. It's disposable income and it's the propensity to consume. Now, propensity to consume is a lot higher in these new emerging residential locations closer to commercial hubs like Marathali, Sarjapur, Aura, belt in Bangalore, which is where all the new wealth is getting generated. And hence, they want to be closer in these locations. Now, traditionally, if you compare land prices, these locations are actually slightly cheaper, and they, that gap has narrowed down in the last 3 to 5 years as compared to central Bangalore. But e-commerce players want to be in these newer locations. So you need to be very careful about, which customer are you targeting, what's your profile, both in terms of income and propensity to consume when you choose locations, specifically, I think, for in-city. Even otherwise, on your overall point about how close do you want to be on consumption hubs, I think every player is taking a certain view, right? We at ESR have taken a certain view that we want to be within 45 minutes of a large consumption hub. That's the criteria we've kept for ourselves, which is typically maybe either equidistant to what current stock is available, or maybe 10-15 minutes sooner to the city. That means that the land that we may buy is perhaps 5 to 20% at a premium as compared to what most of the competition is buying. Right. The current trends to us suggest that there is demand for it. The current trends to us suggest that customers are more willing in terms of both volume and pricing to pay a little bit of a premium to be closer to the cities. But obviously, you got to be very, very careful, because ultimately it's a very price elastic industry, and you can't overpay for any of your input costs. Land being one of your input costs. So you got to be close to the city, but you got to be very, very careful in what you're paying as a price to be close to the city. That's it from my end.
So thank you, Rajat. I think that's a very interesting perspective, because see, a lot of these cities that we see are circular cities. We have outer ring roads, inner ring road, then inner ring road becomes outer ring road becomes peripheral ring roads. You have KNP, you have multiple things. The cities are growing. I mean, there's no two ways on that. And like you said, I mean, one of the questions that I would ask you is like, what is your criterion for an in-city, which you answered upfront, that you have a 45-minute catering time to these people.
So that's for... Sorry, so that's not for in-city. That is for typical. Horizontal, large box fulfillment center, sort of projects.
Right. So that's why I wanted to kind of clarify from you. I mean, we are also talking very faster delivery models that are being experimented. Why I'm saying, or why I'm cautiously using the word experimented, is that there's every day there is a tweet that that 10 minutes is becoming 15 minutes and 15 minutes is becoming half an hour. And some people say that, boss, why are you pushing it so much? When other evolved logistics hubs are not promising 10, 15 minutes, they're still at a day delivery or maybe 4-hour delivery or things like that. Uh, I'd come to the in-city part, but before that, I would want to kind of also touch upon a larger, like slightly macro view on tier 2 cities. So that's that. I'll start with Sridhar sir. Maybe I'll pick Aditya and come back to you, Rajat. I want your views, Sridhar sir. I mean, we are hearing this tier 2 now very frequently. I mean, I know a lot of you are making trips to these cities and evaluating land. I don't want to increase the cost of land, but then can you give us a sense of why tier 2 is emerging and why suddenly there's been a buzz of activity in tier 2? I mean, start with Sridhar sir for you.
See, tier 2, now it's all depends on, for example, tier 1 for me is apart from the large 4 metros, also the other metros like Hyderabad, Calcutta, Chennai, and Bangalore and other stuff. So, right, so 8 cities are now tier 1, technically. Now, from a consumption center point of view. So, what you should see, Shyam, is I think what Aditya mentioned earlier, and which I always believed, it's always about reaching the customer fast. Now, just to add to what Rajat said or what you said and what everyone said, it's all about minutes became hours, becoming second minutes, minutes becoming seconds, seconds becoming nanoseconds. People are monitoring their delivery by nanoseconds, the last mile. And that's where the data centers play a huge role in terms of connectivity. People look at their mobile. So this click and buy culture has now transcended to a different level, like your Zeptos, which deliver in 12 minutes. And actually they run the clock on your mobile to see that you are getting it in 10 minutes or 12 minutes from the time you order. And I've checked each and every startup app to see whether they're fulfilling the promise or not. So given that perspective, now tier 2 is essentially the reimagining of workforce going back. Now this COVID has played a huge, it's a lesson. It's also a pandemic has treated us out to also the human behavior, adapting to new environment, and this hybrid model, the re-engineering of the entire working style and all of that. So I could see that, tier 2 cities have become large consumption centers because, fundamentally I was going through some statistics and I found that 90% of the laptop purchase and, different electronic purchase as compared to tier 1 has come from tier 2 cities in terms of that segment. And that means the consumption bases are shifting essentially by the digital transformation which has already taken place. So tier 2 typically plays a very important role right now. Markets like Lucknow, Kanpur, you take Ghaziabad, you take near Maharashtra, Nasik, Pune. All these centers are becoming where people don't, they have become a hybrid style of working, re-engineering of the workplaces where people can work out of home. That COVID has only accelerated the use of digital medium as a mode of living. I'm stretching it from an imagination perspective because you're anyway going to talk about metaverse in some time. So I'm saying method of living. So all of this, if you see, has changed our lifestyle, has changed our cultural mindset towards buy. And earlier I used to think that people used to change in terms of thought process in 5 years time. Today I find people changing it in 3 years. If you see a 12-year-old and a 15-year-old, you will change a different wavelength in terms of the thought process. And similarly, the consumption centers, earlier when Asian Paints, where we should track up to an SKU, or in Coke, distribution model, underlying the manufacturing model, or in Britannia, where re-engineered the entire manufacturing supply chain with LCM. Here, when I see, it's now more driven by consumption. And one thing is natural because of the COVID, a lot of people in the third year now, and people are coming out, the pent-up demand and the change in the consumption pattern has driven the demand towards tier 2 cities. And I could see growth practically in double digits across all of them in terms of consumption pattern. As a matter of curiosity, I was checking out certain items of purchase or, typically for the aspiring population. But incidentally, all of you must be aware that India is moving towards to be the more young country, because by 2025, you are expecting 60% of your population to be of an average age of 25. 60%. So just think about it. The entire, and you add that to the huge digital transformation and the instant gratification model and the monitoring in nanosecond basis. So all of this is now, to great extent, a lot of infrastructure is also built around the city thanks to the government. NHA has built roads 2 kilometers per day at the speed at which our minister Nitin Gadkari is building. Plus connectivity has increased dramatically. So I think it's going to bridge those gaps. So tier 2 city markets are the markets to look for. Yes, one will argue from a cost point of view, yield point of view, pricing point of view, that we will take it up separately, because then there's a separate strategy to it. I mean, you will still build A-class warehouses, and I look forward to tier 2 cities being a big, huge market. I can name, and all the group sitting here would know the tier 2 cities, which will be very much up in the, even Coimbatore, for example, I'm seeing demand there, I'm building something there. So the whole idea is that this kind of tier 2 consumption pattern. So a lot of people who come to work from Coimbatore to Chennai being T1, is not okay. Some portion is saying, no, why not? I'll still stay at Coimbatore and still get to do everything that I get to do in Chennai. So the consumption has shifted. And that consumption is getting more balanced across India as a country. So my view on the tier 2 on a very economic and
very
consumption.
Very positive. Okay. Got it. Thank you, sir. Thank you. So I pull in Rahul at this point of time. Aditya, I'll just come back to you in a minute. But Rahul, why I'm asking this question to you is like, you started off with a bang. I mean, going on full throttle in terms of setting up in the traditional cities, as we talk. Maybe I'm wrong, but just want to pull you in from a Blackstone perspective. I mean, can you give us an overview in terms of horizon? What are you talking about when you see entering the market at this point in time? I mean, how are you keeping things under control? I mean, where are your priorities in terms of the demand that you're seeing? The trend has changed for demand in the recent times, and we've seen that we talked about. There is consensus that there is acceleration in this space, and there is accelerated demand also coming your way. How are you going to bridge this demand? How are you keeping up with the pace on this particular aspect?
So Shyam, thank you very much. And Sapna and Realty Plus. And I'm actually very happy. I'm getting to hear Shridhar, because he's a man of strategy. To hear him speak, it's wonderful. With Aditya, I have enjoyed a cup of coffee, in his office, and he's somebody, and under his work, lots of benchmarks have been established for this industry in the country. And Rajat, it's good to meet you, but I'm going to separately call on you and get to share a cup of coffee with you also. So when you asked about the BX view and what do we think and how do we see opportunity, Shyam? So see, globally, if I was to compare to action in more mature markets, and I'll give you an insight even from within a BX platform. See, in India today, if you look at the total market across grade A and B, it's somewhere about 330 mil. And if I see US in itself, for a country of 333 million people, the market total is 14 billion square feet. And within the Blackstone portfolio, within this asset class, there is 1.2 billion square feet, which Blackstone globally is built up, creating different partnerships. And a couple of days ago, I was speaking to the CEO of Link Logistics, which is Blackstone's, US platform, a gentleman called Luke Petherbridge. And his portfolio is 540 million square feet. And I was actually joking with him. And Luke was telling me, look, I'm running a startup. So I said, Luke, if you're running a startup, then I'm an infant. So that's a comparative. So as far as we are concerned, we think that India is actually in its infancy, and there is a big runway ahead for us to grow. India is a country of 1.35 billion people. It's a huge domestic consumption market. And the market forces with us, the release, as you know, effectively has been only since 2017 with GST. And while other mature markets I see, have been there between the last 3 to 5 decades. But the next 4 or 5 years is going to shorten the time gap. One is COVID's been a very big accelerator. Separately, courtesy, the penetration of, internet and mobile, that's going to grow. The government has a BharatNet plan. And under BharatNet, even villages are going to now get fiber optic connectivity. Separately, when we look at the region, where India wants to be a dominant powerhouse, supplying not only manufacturing, but also, added services. And look at the Gati Shakti plan, for example, which is effectively a $1.4 trillion capex commitment over the next 5 years. And if you see similar precedents, what happened in the US in the 70s, which actually led to creation of lots of infra, and then it supported logistics demand. Or if you see China, what happened in effectively starting the decade of 90, 92, and continuing till now, I think it is now India's place, to bask in that sunshine. And it is for us to be creating that opportunity. And if I just look at trends from our market, the market's growing in demand, warehousing itself at a CAGR of 44% between 2017 to 2020. When I see the increase in leasing, just year on year between 20 to 21, it's a 39% increase from 20 mil in the year prior to 28 mil in 21. Similarly, supply increasing 38% from 19 mil to 27 mil. So I think all these are very relevant pointers. And Shridhar was earlier speaking of key cities. I think we have a massive opportunity in there to grow. Having said that, and markets are in different cycles across, because when I see US, for example, it's been able to get effectively, an 11% plus 11.3% rent growth year on year. While for us, that may, sound like music to our ears, but I'm certain, in some time that's going to grow. Another thing which is currently in our favor, though if I see it from a cycle perspective, our input land cost is higher, but typically in very high consumption markets, typically what's happening is that between land to our projects of construction, it's a 1/3, 2/3 divide when I look at my total project cost. And in more mature economies, the embedded cost of land tends to be higher. And Rajat was earlier alluding to in-city, and especially when the fulcrum moves to in-city, that phenomena is going to come into play very fast. So in the industry, we have to be very cognizant of that and sourcing opportunities, which should be sustainable over a period of time. Because if, development is going to be not basis very accurate demand projections, then from a yields perspective, that may suffer. And separately, short term, I see two key challenges. Look at the price of crude itself. It used to be, December 2020, it was under $50 a barrel. And the last month, it was over $112 a barrel. Look at steel. End of 2020, it was about 45,000 rupees. Now it's closer to 88, 90,000 rupees. And steel today effectively, is about 40% of our input costs. So those are some short-term challenges that we have to figure out and solve. And we have to also co-opt our customers in. Because if we don't do that, what will happen is that the market will become unsustainable from a returns perspective. And I see industries have come together because, to also share, these costs forward. So I was even looking at Maruti, over the last 12 plus months, India's biggest mass market, auto provider. They've had 3 increases and the 4th one is underway. So similarly, I've been reading to say, what's happening, even with the logistic providers like delivery and all of that, how, they've had to, pass on cost increases. So I think similarly, we have to be quite sanguine to say that whether it's our customers or us, we have to be in an environment, which will actually long-term support development. So there we have to work with our customers, A. B, we have to be very mindful of the challenges, whether it's around, the input costs of steel or, when we select land. But overall, as I told you, the market in India is in its infancy, and we have a fantastic runway ahead of us.
You mentioned runway. That brings me to Richard. Richard, you've been doing some fantastic work with JetFreight. Honestly, when your name came up to me, then I started reading a lot about freight logistics and all that. Some of them went over my head, but then I know you do a fantastic job on that. I'll just step back to the good work that has been put up, and it is not easy to operate freight logistics. I'll take up two critical things with you. I mean, while we all know the kind of infrastructure that is put in by these gentlemen, I mean, airport logistics, how has that sector evolved from a freight standpoint? What are the things that you're seeing? What are the trends that you're seeing? Is there more automation coming in? Are there any other trends that you see from a freight logistics perspective? It's a little different from the pure play logistics. The second point that I want to touch upon is that the imminent fourth wave or the fifth wave, I don't know, we've lost count now because we tend to believe that we are not in any wave as of now. But I know there's been start-stop kind of a thing for everybody, for developers, for clients, for occupiers who come to us. I mean, what is your reading? I mean, how did the entire pandemic play out for your sector? I mean, when it comes to the logistics part, and what are the trends that we are seeing? How the reshaping is happening? I'm also connecting back to our topic for the day as to how that e-commerce is reshaping your side of the business. Richard, just your take on that.
Yeah. So thank you for your question, and good afternoon or good evening, whichever part of the world you are. So coming to your question with regards to the pandemic, so because we are, I mean, our company does all kinds of logistics. We do warehousing to a very small extent, and we plan to grow in that sector, but we are largely in air and sea freight and a little bit of road transportation. We do all kinds of work for our customers, but we outsource our trucking requirements, warehousing requirements to a great extent. That is the first thing. Second thing is that we also do air freight for the government of India, vaccines. So we used to do polio vaccines earlier. Now we do COVID vaccines. So right from 2020, we have been doing COVID vaccines. So we were one of the first ones to, sort of start our office in 15 days of the pandemic. So we had to do that because, a lot of the entire industry, the airport and all the stakeholders, a lot of exports were stalled, which is not a good thing for the country. So the entire, all the stakeholders came together and said that, okay, anyhow, we have to start exports at least because that earns revenue for the country, and even there were a lot of vaccines that had to be exported internationally. So that's how it started, and we had a lot of trial runs before we could actually start. So it took us almost 10, 15, 20 days, to get all the permissions in place. And finally we said, okay, let's do one shipment, and the first shipment started. So then after that, slowly, so there were cargo freighters. Another problem we faced was that there were no passenger flights. So because there were no passenger flights, so our cargo goes in the belly of the passenger flight. So because there was no passenger flights, there was no supply. So that also was a big mess. So, so getting cargo freighters in the country and then, filling them up with whatever export-related cargo there was. So that it was a kind of challenge that we faced then. And with time, it has improved. Now we have become experts at this. I think after this pandemic, I think we can face anything. So it gives us a good practice to deal in difficult times. With regards to automation, I'll be honest with you, the airport and at least the air cargo, is not as good as your warehousing industry is. So it is sadly moving at a sales pace. They are moving, but it's all fragmented. Everything is fragmented, and because it is fragmented and there is no, like, warehouse, you will have the automation inside the warehouse, but here there are too many stakeholders. So putting them together, so one could be really technology advanced, but the other would not probably be. So that is the problem. So that is where, we have bottlenecks. Even today we have a lot of bottlenecks. Airports have their own, own issues, their own problems with regards to space and with regards to permissions, security, etc. So, these are the real problems. And I think the third question was with the e-commerce. So e-commerce is really going to boom. I think some gentlemen just mentioned some numbers regarding e-commerce, and and I think that is not only going to be happening domestically but also internationally. So internationally, I think we are going to. I mean, domestically, you all are all seeing it, but internationally also, I think India is going to be exporting a lot through the e-commerce route to the world, and that I think is going to really catapult in the next 4, 5, 6 years, and it's going to be an enormous volume that is going to go by air and by sea, so there will be a lot of warehousing requirement for these kind of customers too. So it's not only domestic requirements, also international requirements that are going to be that we are going to see. So I hope I've answered your question to your.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you. That was very nice perspectives that you brought to the table. I'd move to Rajat. Rajat, I mean, I'm having some hard questions for you today. Land price is increasing. People like me come back and fight very hard for rentals. We want rents to keep decreasing. The input costs have gone up. I mean, Rahul mentioned that. Aditya also touched upon that. Steel has gone up massively. We are also seeing double-digit figures in terms of wholesale price inflation. Not only steel, there's a lot of after effects of the overall war situation in Ukraine, or the overall tensions rising, imminent next wave, and things like that. While we are all going on the fast pace, which you think will put the brake on the industry faster?
Okay, that's a tough one. So it's about how you think about, what's your plan, right? Is it a 3-month plan? Is it a 3-year plan? Is it a 30-year plan? I think I'd have different answers to each of these three. How we look at it, and how I'd like to believe most of the panelists, I can see here would look at it. They look at it from a medium to long term perspective, right? Is the war here to stay, and is there this hyperinflation mode that we're in? Is that here to stay? I don't think so. Will it ease out immediately, or in the next 1 or 2 months? Maybe it won't, right? Will steel prices go back from 90 to 100,000 a ton to kind of back to 45, 50? No. Can they go back to 70, 75? They can, right? That's a macro bet that one's assuming here. When it comes to rents, is there high price elasticity right now across locations? There is. But let's compare it again, because logistics, as Rahul said, is in a very, very, let's say, initial stage of growth in India right now. Let's draw a few comparisons across markets. We can pick up maybe both. We can pick up China as a more closer cousin. We can pick up US as another larger, more mature market. In a typical city like New York, Chicago, Denver, all these large cities, if you compare CBD office rents to what is perhaps industrial rent in outskirts of these areas today, I think the typical ratio is about 1:12, 1:4, 1:5. If we compare that to a Bombay or a Delhi, a Connaught Place rent vis-a-vis a Gurgaon suburban warehousing rent, and similarly, let's say BKC Bombay rent to a Bhiwandi rent, that ratio is about 1:12, 1:30. That is a very simple, let's say, indicator for you on what's the possible growth here. In fact, to add to this possible delta being compressed, why do we think this delta can compress soon? Infrastructure in India is even worse. It's easier from a Chicago CBD to get to Chicago outskirts as compared to what happens in India, and hence there's no reason why this delta should exist forever. I think at some point of time, rents will need to correct. Input prices may correct by 5%, but I think rents would correct. And when I say correct, I mean upwards by 10, 20% in the next couple of years. I don't think there's an option. as more and more market becomes grade A, all of us are chasing similar yields, late single digits, early double digits. All of us are chasing similar IRRs, mid to late teens. I think everyone, I'm assuming, on the group's kind of talking about similar number here. As the market becomes more organized, I think both in terms of elasticity, which is tenants' preference to go to grade A spaces and pay a premium on that. Also, in terms of just lack of choice that some of these tenants would have while occupying spaces, I think rents will go up. Will yields go back to being double digits? I think when I entered this industry about 4 years ago, everyone was talking about 10.5%, 11% development yields, 8.5%, 9% core yields. Both of those was compressed by about 150 basis points in the last 4 years. And I think that compression is here to stay. I don't think we'll see 10.5%, 11% too soon. I don't think we'll see core ever. I think core ever, at least in my lifetime, trade at 9% again, right? Unless macroeconomics really change. I really think development yields will be in this 9 to 10% range in the next 3 to 5, 7 years. Core will be 6.5%, maybe to 7.5%. And the interplay between the two is really the margin that we're all kind of gunning towards, right? So I think as long as that variation is 200 basis points or upwards, there is money to be made in this sector. What all of the recent trends suggests, input price escalation, land cost escalation, more competition in entering, is that we need to be super efficient. And I think that's true for any real estate product, even more so because, yes, it's a tighter margin product as compared to office, where perhaps core yield is 7%, but entry yields are 11, 12%. Right. But then there is an argument to be made here that tailwinds are extremely favorable, right? Rahul, rattle off some numbers and what we're as compared to US in terms of stock. Mr. Shridhar mentioned in terms of demographics. So there's a lot of runway here for growth, and I think capital partners understand that. I think that's the good news here. Capital partners understand that we're entering into a stable country. We're entering into a country which is where demographics are super favorable right now, and return expectations also have become more realistic. I don't think anyone's today entering logistics in India expecting 20 to 25%. I just think that doesn't exist. One has to look at a mid to late teen sort of an IRR for a development play, which if you compare to other asset classes, right, we should look at what other asset classes outside real estate are offering. You look at equity, you look at bond deals right now. We're talking about an asset class where tailwinds are extremely favorable. Your worst case scenario, right? You buy land and sit on it in India. If you look at historical trends, you make 7-8% IRR, which is a worst case scenario. So you basically, this is my practically every month negotiation with LPs that we work with. You're entering into a product which is in between a bond and an equity, and hence you cannot expect returns which are beyond even what equity is traditionally delivered. So right. I think that return expectation rationalization is beginning to happen. It will happen more and more as the market becomes more institutionalized, and at the same time rents will increase. So amongst these two factors, we'll have to budget in for the fact that the hit we've taken in the last 2 years on input cost prices, we'll cover up for that.
Right. So on rent increases, Aditya, I know you will concur, but how has the pain been for developers over the last couple of months? I mean, that's very important because I think for occupiers also it's good to align to where the market is heading, because at home your prices of gas is going up, your price of day-to-day products produce is going up, but it can't be any different in business, right? I mean, when input prices are increasing and there's rent revisions that are imminent, what's your take on?
No. So it's more of the same. The pain that the rest of the world is feeling or the rest of the country is feeling is what our business is also feeling, because input costs have gone into another stratosphere altogether that all the other gentlemen have spoken about. Land costs are not going south, right? You want rents to come down when you negotiate with us. In fact, you know what, Shyam, why don't you make the rent zero? Then even after that, at least it will start going up. Maybe that's one option. Because then
redefine the
IRR, base. Yeah, exactly. Your IRR will be an exponential number then. Anyhow, and rents we've had no choice. I think everyone over here is saying the same thing, that we can't live with these rents anymore. Rents have to go up. So rents will go up. They're already going up from our side. The fact is that even with rents going up, our yields are not going up, right? So our yield to cost is still tottering at a reduced level. I think, Rajat, you said 100 to 200 bips. I completely agree with you. Is that going to be something that's going to last for near term, short, medium term, or long term? It remains to be seen. There has to be cooling off on commodity prices. It cannot sustain like this. I don't think the global economy can sustain it like this. So forget India, warehousing, industrial space. So this is the cycle that thing. I met you yesterday in our office, Shyam, and I said, the timing of this debate that we're doing today is either really, really opportune or really, really unfortunate, because we are in the thick of that point of inflection as developers. And I think I can safely speak on behalf of all of us, where there is no choice but to go back and say, hey, listen, guys, this has gone up by X, that has gone up by Y, this has gone up by so-and-so. And we are taking a severe beating. It costs 2,000 rupees to make a building now. And so you can't sustain a, I don't know, 18 rupee or 20 rupee or 16 rupee or 22 rupee rental, depending on which market you're in. So it's time to kind of play your role as an occupier in that play act, and at least have some kind of partial contribution to it, which on a case-to-case basis, it remains to be seen how many people participate and how many people don't. The one additional point I'd like to say is that, Indospace, we've been doing this for 15 years now in this business. So we were early to the party, so to say, or the Lone Rangers, I would say. The good thing that's happened from this group of developers is that, stupid stuff has gone away. And what I know it sounds very silly and childish for me to say that, but what I mean by that is that earlier we were competing with grade B, grade C developers who were holding land for the last 100 years, and so didn't consider land as any cost, and then went and gave any specification, and suddenly an apples to apples comparison was being made, and we were scratching our heads saying, should we do a deal at 12 rupees rent or 11 rupees rent and give 1 year rent free, and stupid stuff like that. And for the sake of keeping the ball rolling, we took certain decisions which were strategic in nature, just to kind of keep the flow going. Those days are gone. There will still be fierce competition between all of us, and there will still be, we will still go and clamor and fight and try and win as many mandates and tenants as our groups can. But what's happened is that the playing field has become level from an industry standpoint. And that gives me personally a lot of satisfaction, because I know Rahul or Shridhar are not going to go and do some insane transaction somewhere. It's all going to be within a certain, hemisphere and a certain framework, which gives me a lot of comfort. I know it wasn't your question, but I just wanted to kind of put this out there also. It gives us a lot of comfort that at least the playing field has become a little more level.
I completely concur with you, Aditya. I think on two aspects. One aspect is that I think 3-4 years back, when we used to do webinars, we used to talk about flight to quality. I think that was the theme. That grade C, grade B, non-compliant. I mean, these are not standards anymore. I mean, what you were doing at that point of time were always extras. So we use these terms, standards and extras, and pretty much you were doing stuff which were more above the standards. So you were setting a standard for yourselves. Your peers agree that you have set benchmarks. So that is true in a way, because a lot of people have come up and say that, boss, I don't know what is grade A specification, but give me Indospace specs. I mean, we'll start with them. So from there, I think what Hiranandani is doing today, I think Greenbase as an entity has come up in terms of doing a lot of non-standard, as I call it, but more tenant improvements, very, very high tenant improvements, very specialized buildings, walk the talk with developers, give something in record time, which I've seen in front of my eyes. Developers are also playing in that era where you compete on skill, on deliverable, on capital, which is to be employed. Gone are those days that a developer was waiting for one building to get leased out, and then he goes and borrows from a bank and then comes back for another. Today, I can talk to any of you for any size of investment that a large multinational is coming into India and he wants to set it up. I think there's no dearth of capital. Rajat, I want to ask you, is there enough capital still chasing the sector, or do you see that there will be a slowdown?
So there is capital, right? I think there is active capital and there is further passive capital sitting on the sidelines. I think my research suggests at least for $2.5–3 billion of capital waiting to be deployed, foreign institutional capital in the Indian logistics space. But the challenge is both. One is the scale at which we can execute. I think irrespective of margins and input price and all of these, which are relatively short-term challenges, land acquisition in India per se, irrespective of the price that I'm willing to pay today, is an extremely tedious process, right? The records are still not digitized. Even if I've got, let's say 10,000 crores sitting in my books, can I just actively go out and buy 5,000, acres of land in the next 2 months? I can't. I think that to me puts a big lid on possible supply and hence possible capital that can be deployed in this sector. Deal sizes are relatively small as compared to office, as compared to developed markets, maybe $10–20 million, $25 million per deal. So there is only so much capital that you can efficiently deploy. Plus all these recent trends about margin compression, I think investors are questioning, and especially with, let's say, office coming back, resi coming back in an even bigger way in the last 6–12 months. That should new money now chase logistics? Should we go slow? Should we, go more, let's say, overweight on some of these other sectors that we have not put a bet on, in the last 2 years? Overall, though, I think if you compare institutional capital allocation to logistics across the globe and in India, it's a very small percentage right now as compared to what they've put in other asset classes, purely because current organized institutional grade stock is very small. So I think we'd continue to grow. You'd see capital deployment of maybe close to $1 billion every year, if not more, in the next 3 to 5 years. Do we need more? I don't think we need more capital. Yes, we need smarter capital. We need capital which is willing to be more patient, more long-term, and which understand. I keep going back to the same point. This asset class is not a very high beta asset class. You need capital partners who understand that, because this asset class is not a very high beta asset class, there is only so much alpha you can expect. I think, again, that maturity is happening over time.
Sure. Thank you, Rajat. I'm just cognizant of time. We have a minute, so I'll just quickly summarize our findings for the day. I think very true to the topic. I think e-commerce has played a very, very vital role in kind of redefining this entire sector, especially the warehousing sector, from what used to be an unorganized play to a very organized play. Today we have the who's who in the industry who's kind of putting their monies, kind of spending time and energies on this sector, goes to show that there is demand. And Rahul, would you build all the way? I mean, with all these challenges, would you continue to go and build? Is that the way that you go forward?
Yes, absolutely.
One word, yes. Yeah. So it is absolutely the way forward. I think there's no stopping this sector. I think the sector is going strength to strength. I think there's no two ways on that. Shridhar, some more inventory coming from your end into the play. You're on mute, sir.
Hi, sir. No, I was hearing it is good to hear perspectives, and Rajat actually summarize the practical realities on the ground. See, this is a low-hanging fruit as you compare it to other alternate asset class in the sector, like residential, commercial, grade A real estate. We had a large deal with commercial real estate. The idea is that the capital is going to chase this asset, but for 3 reasons. Because India, there's still huge gap. There is growth. We have already moved from a go-down stage to grade A warehousing, and then there is the institutionalized, as Aditya put it across. And more than that, what we see is also that now your yields are temporarily under pressure because of your inflationary trend, commodity inflation, soaring crude prices, which is putting on pressure on the IRRs. For example, in the last 1 year, as I would see, steel and cement have jumped close to more than 50% in terms of it. And as someone said, it's not going to go back to the normal. It is going to be plus 20–30%, even if it corrects. So you have to live with the new normal. Number 2, if you understand that your asset class is a low-hanging fruit and your yields are going to be in your warehousing yields. If you've got a mix of warehousing and industrial, industrial yields could be much higher because of Make in India. A lot of supply chain Make in India and export is coming, and we are building that. We are probably getting double digits plus. But on the warehousing side, I'm like all of you. It's single digit. Later end between 8 and 10%, and if you make 10%, that's great, I would say. But then to make that happen, yes, there has to be growth in rentals, which I anticipate should happen post this. There has to be some sense in terms of passing on the, for example, I mean, your logistics is bulk of it is your petrol and diesel, and everyone has taken a price increase and passed it on to a Unilever or a Asian Paint. So similarly, all your 3PLs and e-commerce guys. So similarly, we as developers should also should be able to, and I see that happening, be able to pass on the inflationary pressures to the sector and see a rental growth. So what is important for the asset? Rental growth, compression in yields, which obviously depends on in a year's time or something like that, and redundancy should be less. In terms of demand and supply, this industry has very lot to offer in the Indian context, and yes, it's set for growth. So I must say that in its next 5 to 8 years, we'll see large amount of institutional growth in this segment coming.
Excellent. Thank you so much for summarizing that up for our viewers, and thank you once again. Thank you, esteemed colleagues. Thank you, industry leaders. Thank you, participants, for staying invested through the session. I hand it over again back to Swapna.
Yeah, that was some very interesting perspectives that came from our speakers here. I think the sense that we get is that there's a lot more to be done. It's still a new sector, a lot of new models we will see coming up. Shyam, what is your take, your last word on how this sector is going to develop in next few years?
So my take is this: 3PL has kind of left a lasting impression. E-commerce has fueled up the growth. I think the sector, like you said, is evolving. I think we have still more growth left. There's a lot of headroom for players to enter. I think the gentlemen that you see here have set the benchmarks very high. I think we are on par with any global supply that's coming in across the world. I think we are trying to innovate a lot more. This 30-minute delivery model is not there in Singapore. Trust me on that. So I think we are very innovative as a country. I think there's a clarion call from the Prime Minister that on Atmanirbhar. So a lot of self-reliance that is being talked about. So the demand is here to stay. I think a short-term rent increase imminent. I think there's no two ways about it, because you want to have grade A infrastructure, you have to pay for grade A infrastructure. That's simple as that. But I think there is very, very good demand growth. That is what Collier's report also captures. We released it yesterday for the top 5 cities. We've seen demand grow up. There's a lot of supply also coming into the market. Demand is always chasing the supply. I think that as long as that is happening, I think we are all in for a very, very good growth scenario as we go by. Short-term to medium-term and even long-term vision for this sector is great. I think that's the summation that we have from the sector, and that's my view as well.
The demand for grade A spaces is huge. We've still not tapped it. I think we have just scratched the surface. So one closing comment from all our speakers. What is that the government can do more? We have Gati Shakti, national logistics policy coming in, 100% FDI now in this segment. What one thing, starting with Mr. Shridhar, what one thing do you expect the government to do more for this sector?
I think they already, I think, neutered the idea and put it industrial and logistics sector into the infrastructure category. So that's something which is very welcome. What they can do is make the clusters, make the land acquisition a little bit much more easier and standardized, because right now, as I think what Rajat was pointing out, land acquisition is every time he started, he had this land as an issue in terms of cost and acquisition in India. So maybe, there is something for this sector specifically, because this sector is contributing directly to the GDP and is very visible. So, for example, they have taken an initiative, but if they can do something more in terms of giving, earmarking certain spaces which they have started. I've been talking to respective state governments and also at the center to be able to, say that, a lot. It's not that you don't do it at a market price, but make it easier, make it much more
process of land acquisition. It can be.
That's something which I do. Second most important thing I want the government to do, and I think they can do, is to allow input credit on GST to this sector. Because the commodity inflation, the only way to sustain the yields that my friends are talking here about is to make that happen. I made a presentation also to APRIA, to other sectors, to the last economic advisor. And I once again reiterate in this forum that they can definitely do.
That's right. IPC is one demand which is from all segments of real estate right now.
There are two things that I would take a
deep pride. So, Mr. Sikri, your one thing that you expect the government to do for this sector.
I was going to say have a unified land acquisition code, which Shridhar already took my answer. And then since he took that, I was going to say, do whatever you can to control commodity prices, but he took that answer as well. So I have no further answers to give after that.
Okay, so you have similar sentiments. You also believe
Absolutely.
that land acquisition is something where government can make the processes easier, and again, the prices, the commodity prices,
Absolutely,
that the government can help with. Rajat, you would like to add one, your take
Right.
what government can do.
Yeah, I think planning guidelines can be more appreciative of this asset class. In a lot of cities and states, if you read planning guidelines today, by various authorities, warehousing doesn't exist as an asset class. You'll be surprised, but that's true. Whether it's in city or whether it's outside cities, I think all states and cities need to recognize that this asset class is, prevalent, is here to grow. And just like they have specific norms for commercial, residential, I think every city needs to have specific norms both for industrial and warehousing. These are actually two sub-segments that vary in how they operate, and be very clear about what you can do, what you can't do. Right now, I think we're subject to a lot of speculation, bureaucratic, indecision.
Have it, but it's not uniform across the country. You're right, but some states have it.
That's right. So what Rajat is saying, we do not have actually the guidelines for this sector, which is quite surprising, that we need to come up with some kind of guidelines like we have for other segments of real estate. So this is where, and that is one sign of a mature market or mature sector. So this is where, again, government can come with standard guidelines for this segment, what Mr. Rajat Garg just said. Mr. Rahul Pandit, your views, what government can do for the sector, and then we'll go to Richard.
Okay, actually two things: to improve overall capital efficiency and also operating efficiency, and give a big fillip to development. First is, this sector is by and large non-polluting. And when you look at the norms for development, for environment clearance, they are interestingly more stricter and rigorous that apply to regular polluting industries. So there is a great opportunity to view this sector as a developmental sector, which is going to contribute to reducing the cost of logistics for India. And how do you do that? Is actually take a view to say, hey, if this is non-polluting, then how are we going to be treating environment clearances? Because typically, depending on state to state, this could effectively, increase carrying costs anywhere from 6 to 9 months. And, for more foreign capital to come on in, it has to be very progressive. The second, which should actually be a national agenda. Shri Modi has set for India a target of 500 gigawatts of clean energy by 2030. Now, all of us across our portfolios have massive roofs, and which we could utilize, as is happening in most economies, to be generating solar energy and to feed it into the grid, and also make the operating costs of businesses lower. However, while the central government and the Prime Minister have this very appreciable and aggressive target for the country, given what's happening in the states and various discoms, either it is totally discouraged. So some states say, look, you cannot do this and you cannot feed it to the grid. And some states have set caps which are very minuscule, like 0.5 megawatt. Each of these locations could be producing a couple of megawatts, and contribute to the national grid. So that's the second thing which could be done to have this sector actually contribute to the nation's agenda of clean energy.
That's right. That's right. Very, very valid point, because ESG is becoming one big factor with a lot of occupiers, especially international companies, and that is what they are looking at when they are taking up spaces. Richard, lastly, you heard all the warehousing guys, what their take is on when you are hiring a warehousing space, what is your expectation, and where do you see that the government can do something more for this sector?
I honestly think that the government is already doing a lot. And they are thinking the right direction. I just really would like them to finish the implementation on time, and that is the most important thing here. So that's what
Okay.
I'm doing.
So the proposals are there. Government is thinking in the right direction, but it is the implementation which is probably needs to be faster, and the execution on grounds is something what is required. So one fantastic panel that we had, and it has set the tone of the day for our rest of the sessions. Thank you, Shyam, for that wonderful moderation of the panel, and to all our speakers, Aditya, Rajat, Mr. Richard, and Rahul Pandit, and Mr. Shridhar. Thank you for being here with us and being part of this session. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.